Today we are talking about cultivating empathy with your neighbors. Sympathy is feeling compassion for someone's hardships, but not necessarily understanding their feelings. I have a video. It's about 3 minutes, and this is a voiceover of Brene Brown. Are you familiar with Brene Brown? She's a writer. She has a wonderful, very empowering podcast. I believe that she's a believer. It's not explicit in a lot of her interviews and interactions because normally they're focused on the people she's interviewing. But she has a lot of Daring to Lead is one of her podcasts. She comes from a complicated family background that she has learned from and uses to empower other people. Anyways, I've really had a lot of encouragement from a lot of her secular writings. And so she did a speech on like a presentation on empathy and how powerful it is. And this is a voiceover with an illustration that really helped me connect with that definition and understanding, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But this video will be to help us understand empathy. Out of the way. See that?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Right.
Amber, you've said that exact same thing to me.
Have I?
Yeah.
Probably an overflow of all my Brene Brown time.
Big deal, though.
It is a very big deal, and it's an extremely big deal when you are connecting with your neighbors, particularly those who are not believers. In Philippians 2:4, I want to look at the why of empathy. Why as Christians is empathy so important? Philippians 2:4 says, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. That's holding and sharing space together in celebration, in grief, and it's expanding your scope outside of you emotionally. Empathy is important in your Christian life. When we look at Galatians 6:2, it instructs believers to carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. I feel like we could probably spend hours just talking about that. I won't, but we've talked about that a lot in here, how important it is to carry each other's burdens, because you physically are not made to carry them alone. And we are having people spiritually and physically die around us every day who try to, right? Empathy aligns with our command to love our neighbors, which we see in Mark 12:31. We spent a lot of time there the other day talking about loving your neighbor as yourself. Loving your neighbor as yourself requires you to empathize with them. It requires it. Understanding their joys, their sorrows, their needs. We seek to understand them in the way that we understand ourselves. Empathy builds stronger relationships in our church and in our community. Empathy fosters deeper connections within the body of Christ, promoting unity, understanding, and support among believers. I am more connected to you when I feel understood by you. We want to invite our neighbors into this. This is something that the church offers. It should offer and should be going on. Opening our Bibles, looking at biblical examples of empathy, you see a lot. What comes to mind specifically with Jesus and interactions he has with people around him? What examples come to mind when you think Jesus and empathy? What characters, people?
What other people?
Sure, like
Or
interactions,
I
like,
was gonna say, like sermon today.
and we're going to spend a lot of time on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also of the woman at the well, sitting with her where she was, listening to her story. He could even tell her some of her story. It was her story, right?
The woman caught in adultery.
Absolutely. Who else does Jesus go to be with in their condition?
I think the little children that he called and made a connection with, when they were told, go away, and he's like, no,
Yeah.
like he made a connection and like knew their needs.
Yeah. You have to go to people, right? I think of the lepers. We talked about this last week. Jesus could have thought it and healed everyone. But that's not the point. It's not just the healing. It's the relationship that's formed, the understanding that's created and connected with in that healing. We've talked a lot about the Good Samaritan. There's an author named Lauren Casper who wrote a book, Loving Well in a Broken World, Discover the Hidden Power of Empathy. I've not read the whole book. I just like this excerpt. She says, as the story goes in Luke 10, a Jewish man is traveling by foot from Jerusalem to Jericho when he falls victim to a brutal mugging. He is robbed, stripped, and beaten within an inch of his life before being left to die on the side of the road. A traveling priest notices the wounded man, but moves quickly. Other side of the road, keeps going. A Levite, same thing, approaches, sees this guy's bloody body, hurries by. Then a Samaritan happens upon the scene, and the whole narrative shifts. And while Jews and Samaritans have been mortal enemies for generations, the Samaritan puts the history of animosity aside. His heart goes out to the man in the gutter, and he is filled with compassion. He is led by empathy. Empathy allows the Samaritan to love the man in the gutter by seeing the man in his pain, understanding the cause of his pain, and choosing to get involved despite the effort that is required. In John 11, it's so crazy how things always work. Mike talked today about Lazarus and his death and his resurrection. Lazarus had two sisters, Mary and Martha. So as the story goes that we heard this morning, Jesus went to Martha and then to Mary and saw her weeping. In verse 35, it says, shortest verse, what does it say? Jesus wept. He wept. He even knew how things were about to get better, right? But then he stopped and honored and connected with them in the feeling they had right there. Jesus had empathy for Mary. Jesus knew that they would get out of this hole together, and he knew that better than anyone. But he also knew how important it is to feel your feelings, and as Brene Brown would say, and name them. He let them sit in their sorrow, and he sat in his own too. The way you grieve someone is proportionate to the way that you loved them. Right? It is. Your grief process is proportionate to your love process. Moving through grief is physiologically important, and Jesus exemplifies this for us in the story of Lazarus. So Jesus emotionally connected with them through empathy. He did not say, "At least he went peacefully," or "I know what you feel because let me tell you about this one time my parents straight up left me in Jerusalem and that was really hard for me." He did not hijack the grief, hijack the conversation in a way to connect. He felt that feeling with them, and that is how he connected. He did not take the emotional and storytelling spotlight, which moves us into our next point about how do we cultivate empathy. This is kind of the main point. So we have to determine what empathy is not. That's very important because empathy done the wrong way shuts people off. It shuts people off in this room from each other, let alone a believer in someone who's not. In the video you saw on the ladder, I'm super visual, and so I will forever remember concepts when I see videos or graphs and things like that. On the ladder, when the animal on the right, or I don't know if it was an elephant, the bigger one, said, they did not say, "Oh, let me tell you about the time that I went through this." They did not, and with good intentions. People don't say that with bad intentions. They didn't say, "Oh, I know, here's my whole story." All that character said when trying to connect was, "I know what it's like down here. You're not alone." They connected emotionally, verbally shared, "You are not alone in this," and then gave that person the opportunity to share. They don't go on about their story. It's not the space for your story, it's the space for your neighbors. Empathy is not processing your own trauma in front of a freshly traumatized person. You can have empathy if you've even never had the same physical experience.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Can,
Absolutely.
so
Because
you can say to somebody, "I don't understand, but I'm here to sit with you."
you don't even have to say that. You can say that, absolutely. But it's not, because Jesus can empathize with us, but Jesus has never been through childbirth, but he's been through pain, and he knows, you know what I mean? Like, there's some people who I've known personally who deny the divinity of Christ because how can he connect us as humans if he's never stubbed his toe? Or like they list out things, and it's like connection isn't just like, oh, we've both broken our left hand before. It's like, I know physical pain, and I can relate to this, or I know grief of losing a loved one, or I don't know it, but I love you and I want to learn from you. I want to be with you in this. I mean, Jesus. There's a number of hurts in the Bible that Jesus never physically, literally experienced, but he can connect emotionally with people, and that seems to be over and over and over again what ties him to people through that. I could not empathize with people, so empathy is emotionally connecting. That's kind of the point that I got from a lot of definitions of empathy, and then the way Jesus shows it in the Bible.
And someone who would list like that is very stuck in their left brain, because
Yeah.
your empathy and your creativity and your way to see things in a very unique and creative way comes from that right side.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, very much like, I need evidence and I need proof. List it out.
Yeah.
Everything's connected.
Absolutely. There was a long time where I feared my ability to be a nurse, to be in ministry, to be a mother, because I was unable to empathize with other people. Like, I brought it up in therapy. I could not sit in their grief because I was unable to sit in my own grief. I could not breathe when I thought about my own grief I was going through. And I ran far from people at church going through hard things, let alone my neighbors across the street. I couldn't do it. And it's not because I didn't care. It's because it was self-preservation. I could not. That wave of therapy in Nashville started because I could not breathe, thinking every day of my own grief. And in that framework, in that structure of counseling, I learned how to walk through my own pain. And heal from it, but also live with it. Like, I think that's the difference in being a Christian. Every day I give my pain up to God, and I say, this hurts because of humanity, and one day it will never hurt again. I don't wait to live life pain-free. I just live my life with hope. And I did go to a Christian counselor, and I felt that that was a very good fit for me. But that taught me how to sit in my own pain and in my own grief for a time, and then continue to live. And I loved the imagery of going down in the hole with someone, because then you climb back up the ladder and you get out. You sit with someone, but you don't stay there. You sit with them for a time in what they're feeling, and you hold it with them. You bear that burden with them for as long as you need to. And literally, it might be a prayer session. We had a wonderful prayer session here this past week where we held each other's burdens and emotions. And I'm so thankful you put that on, Aunt. I learned a lot, and it was so humbling and beautiful to see Christian community in action like that. Like, that's very powerful. And I really hyped it up to Patsy. Like, this is something so important Mama gets to go do, you know. I didn't see that a lot growing up, and so that was so powerful to get to be part of. But I don't remember what I was saying. But you want to be able to share that space with someone and it not wreck you. Just like the Good Samaritan's plans. He was on about his day, going to do his grocery shopping or whatever on earth he was doing. And guys on the road, he stopped what he was doing, helped this guy, and then continued on with his plans. His plans were interruptible. They were able to be interrupted, but they were not destroyed. Disrupted, but not destroyed. I think the same thing is important for our emotions when we are connecting with our neighbors. Your empathy needs to be a thing that you can extend, sit with, but also continue to be healthy in. Sometimes it means some people are a better fit for you than others. I've shared the story of my friend who lost a husband and a child within a year, and that was everything within me to go to that baby's funeral. And I could hug her and kiss her, and I turned around and left, because I knew my limits that day, my spiritual obligation to go see her and sit with her and acknowledge her, and I also knew I was not in a place to stay for the service. And that was huge progress for me, because the year before I would never have even made eye contact with her. And so there's a very individual balance for each person, and you all come here with different traumas and backgrounds, things that still hurt, which means I would also encourage you to give those to someone else. You're both to serve other people, but also to be served. Can I sit with you in the grief that you have? Can you sit with me? Community. Probably should get that word tattooed on my head. Community. Just like, that's such an important theme, and something that is so holy about this group here at the Valley that I've not seen other places, is how it's like alive and breathing. I think I told Robert when we first got here, it's like a hive. This place is like a hive. Like, it's always busy and moving. It's a spiritual hive, and it's like, you just want to sit back and people watch. Just so many spiritual moments happening all the time. So how do we develop a heart for other people? The heart that Jesus has. We have to cultivate a mindset of empathy in our daily lives, which I believe involves humility and openness to understanding other people's perspectives. In our walk through Psalm 119, I had a great time talking about humility. And for me, it was acknowledging that I have a lot more to learn about humility. In cultivating empathy, we seek to learn about other people. We seek to understand. Those things need to be your goal, not to problem solve, not to make them feel good about their situation or silver line it, as it said in here. Just to be there. We've talked about letting a bad thing be a bad thing. Guess who else I heard that from? Brene Brown and David Kessler, a grief expert. Let the bad thing be a bad thing. You don't have to say it's good. Let it be bad, and let that be bad for someone else. Your job is not to fix their problem. It's to sit with them in their problem. Because remember Job's friends. They were great friends until they opened their mouth. Sitting with your friend in their grief and not saying a word, saying, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm so glad you shared that with me. I want to fix your problem. If you come sit with me and tell you about a problem, I want to tell you 100 ways to fix it. My husband tells me I have a headache, and I'm like, take Tylenol. He's like, no, I just want to tell you I have a headache. And I don't have a lot of patience for that, frankly, but that's a different story. But sometimes, oftentimes, most of the time, they're not coming to you to problem solve, and God's the only one who can solve that problem. You can praying about it with someone. That's a wonderful way to acknowledge who's going to solve the problem. Free yourself of that obligation, actually. You guys get a whole bunch of free counseling. I pay for all of it. You guys can have it. My counselor taught me because so the home I grew up in is very complicated. And one of the roles I took on was making everyone happy. That was a role I took on, and that was my job. My job was to make everyone happy, make sure, and I gave myself that job. Was that given to me? Who cares? Who knows? The point is, I felt it was my job to make other people happy. So when they were sad, I had to fix it at all costs. I had to fix it. And my very patient counselor, Claudia, taught me that sad is not a bad emotion. We talked in this class before about how emotions are morally neutral. Jesus felt all kinds of emotions, so if they were bad, he wouldn't have felt them, right? No, they're not bad. Emotions are morally neutral, and they're information about your perceptive experience around you. Sad is an emotion, and it is wrong for me to rob someone of their experience of it. Sad is helping them process something that happened around them. If you're going through something and I just want to immediately cheer you up and make it better, I'm robbing you of you experiencing whatever that is, which is important to you physiologically. It's important to your mental health, your experience as a human, and it's not bad to feel sad, right? Grief is proportionate to love. If you're grieving, you should grieve. I had an assignment from my counselor to watch that movie Inside Out. Have you seen it?
Love them.
Yes. She never gave me homework. She gave me homework twice. She never told me what to do, but she told me what to do twice. One was a podcast. She said, you have to listen to this before we speak to each other again. I said, okay. And it helped inform our conversation the next week. And the other one was watch the movie Inside Out, which I ran from because I was not ready to sit in the emotions of Pixar characters. But I watched it. And that was a really good way it's a secular movie. Okay, it's not like a Bible movie or anything. But it really does a really good job of showing you emotions, how they're all important. You listen with compassion as a way to cultivate empathy. Active listening shows the connecting that is being done. A big thing with our neighbors is overcoming barriers to active listening. Do any pop in your mind when you've been trying to talk to someone and they do this, they look like that, they pull this out of their pocket and start scrolling? What are barriers to active listening? Anticipating. I do this all the time with my husband. You should ask him about it. Where I finish his sentences for him. Or I think I know what point he's about to make. And I'm like, oh yeah, you this. He's like, not at all. I'm trying to tell you this thing over here. Cognitive dissonances, which is like a misunderstanding of the way that you're interpreting something. Defined as preconceived notions that shape what we hear instead of allowing us to listen objectively. Prejudice. I think prejudice is the biggest one for me and my neighbors in general. If my neighbors have a drug history, if my neighbors are pregnant and single, do I automatically make a decision about them and their character and their lifestyle? If they're going through a messy heartbreak and a messy divorce, do I say things like, you should have known that when you married him? Or no kidding, it hurts because this, like all these things, like any type of prejudice. Body language, that's even a big one. And it sounds silly, but it matters. Does your body listen to someone? Your neighbors see that. Jesus stopped and turned around and looked at people. He's like, and I've said this again, he could have just thought it and fixed it, but he stopped and turned around and listened. He sat with children, like he brought himself to people's level. Are there experiences that you've had where listening with compassion made a difference in your relationship? My sister is very good when I'm going through something. and she's on her phone about saying, let me finish this text, and then I'm going to put my phone down and listen to you. Because she knows I need eye contact. I need eye contact, like I need air. I've also had a different therapist who constantly, every time I brought something up, they said, that reminds me of me and my spouse. Let me tell you about it. And I felt like I needed to sit with them in that space. I'm like, oh my word, they need the space. And I'm a recovering people pleaser. And so I would say, that must have been so hard for you. Tell me how you got through it. And I'm like, I think I'm paying for this appointment. But and that person was doing it to connect with me and to really share, but that's the wrong way to connect with someone who's facing their own grief. Now, there's a time to story share. I'll sit with Carol and be like, you're going through this, I'm going through this, let's swap. That's different. You can feel it when someone needs you, which also means cultivating perception. You gotta get outside your head. Jesus was empathetic. Empathy is the way that we connect with our neighbors, no matter how different they are from us, because it's not about shared experience, it's shared human emotion. Empathy shows them that we aren't unreachable, untouchable, judgmental, perfect people. It shows them that we are humans too, saved by God, and we are inviting them to join us. Rosaria Butterfield, in that wonderful, wonderful book I'm reading, Gospel Come to the House Key, she said in some of her writings, compassion, or empathy, means entering the suffering of another in order to lead the way out. May we use our empathy as a way to lead people out of darkness and into the light of Christ. And that's all I have for today. Thank you, guys.